Hello, and welcome to the third video of a multi-part series as we explore church history century by century. Now, we've already discussed the first and second centuries in our last two videos, and today we'll focus on the third century. And like the other videos, I'll be asking Catholics and Protestants, what church would you have belonged to this time in the third century? Would you have been considered a Christian or a heretic in the third century? What church would you have gone to in order to settle disputes on faith and morals? Does your church stand the test of time? So let's take a look at the Christian church in the third century. Much like the second century, there was a good amount of documentation of what the early church fathers believed in the third century. Early church fathers like Tertullian, St. Hippolytus, St. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, St. Cyprian, Popes Urban, Cornelius, Gaius, and 12 others had much to say in defense of the one true church's beliefs. These early church fathers continued to defend beliefs in the Trinity and Jesus' hypostatic union. They continued to defend what many Protestants call inventions like sacred tradition, the one true church, apostolic succession, the primacy of Peter, the infallibility of the church, and Mary as Mother of God. The consistency of beliefs between the first through the third century is pretty impressive, but I guess actually not really, since it is to be expected of Jesus' one true church that he said he would protect from error. And this consistency of faith continues in the beliefs of the sacraments that, again, many Protestants would claim are modern-day Catholic inventions. The belief in the Eucharist and the sacrifice of the Mass continues in the third century. Necessity of baptism as a true sacrament, confession to a priest, confirmation, holy orders, and marriage as a sacrament all continued to be believed in the third century. Don't believe anyone who tries to tell you that they are modern-day inventions, because they're not. As in the second century, there were no ecumenical councils, but a few regional councils of note. The first one I wanted to point out was in Carthage in 251 AD. Now, there were some who believed if you left the church, then you couldn't be let back in. This council addressed this falsehood. The second council in Antioch was interesting in that it dealt with one of their own, a bishop in Antioch, Paul of Samosata, who falsely taught that man became God rather than Jesus becoming man. The church addressed these. In the third century, there were 15 popes total. 6 of the first 8 popes in the first half of the third century were martyred. One pope, St. Anterus, only lasted 43 days before he was martyred. The other half of the third century brought 7 more popes, 3 of which were martyred. There was a tremendous amount of persecution in the early church, and the pope was a big target as the leader of all of Christianity. There were constant struggles against the emperors and heresies, so keeping the faith as taught by the apostles was an extremely difficult and dangerous job. And yet apostolic succession, where up to 29 popes thus far, was alive and well, even through severe persecutions. One thing I wanted to take note of related to those excommunicated is that they were all leaders at one time within the church as either a deacon, priest, or bishop. All of them, as most heresies go, thought that they knew truth better than the church. So history does repeat itself, does it not? Because that's what's kind of happening today too, even. One in particular, though, went so far as to declare himself pope, which is why he is labeled an anti-pope. Now, as for heresies, there were 2 major ones. Sabellianism, who denied the Trinity, and Novatianism, who didn't believe those who had fallen away from the faith should be let back in, even if they repented. What a fighting spirit the early church had for truth. How many of you are afraid for your life because of your beliefs in Jesus and his church? Remarkable people of faith. And I'll ask again, in the third century, what church would you have belonged to? Would you have submitted to the authority of the 15 popes who exhibited their authority in making binding decisions and excommunicating, or would you have opposed them? Would you have believed in the Eucharist, the necessity of baptism, confession to a priest, and the other sacraments, or would you have opposed them? How about the beliefs in sacred tradition, a one true church, apostolic succession, and the primacy of Peter? Would you have believed, or would you have opposed? Now, Catholics, you're all good. as this single Christian church in the 3rd century is your church. And if a Protestant questions your Catholic faith, just ask them, if you would have been opposed to this church in the 3rd century, then where was your church that you would have aligned with to settle disputes on faith and morals and uphold the truth? Who would have been by your side in fighting with you in opposition to what you believe to be falsehood taught by this church? And maybe if you can't find evidence of anyone who would have stood by your side, then maybe you should start asking why. Next video, we'll take a look at the 4th century, and we'll discuss the Second Ecumenical Council then held in Nicaea. Until that time, may God bless you on your faith journey.